Oogenesis. Oogenesis is the formation of mature female gamete, the ovum. It takes place in the ovaries. Millions of oogonial cells are present in each ovary. It is from these oogonial cells that the ovum develops. It consists of three phases: multiplication phase, growth phase, and maturation phase. So, oogenesis consists of three phases: multiplication phase, growth phase, and maturation phase. First comes the multiplication phase. This phase starts prior to birth. So, the multiplication phase starts prior to birth of a female baby. Numerous diploid oogonial cells are formed within each fetal ovary. Diploid oogonial cells are formed within each fetal ovary. No more oogonia are formed after birth. Second comes the growth phase. The oogonia divide by mitosis and enter into prophase 1 of meiosis. They are temporarily arrested in this stage and are called primary oocytes. Primary oocyte is surrounded by a layer of granulosa cells and is called the primary follicle. A large number of these follicles degenerate during the phase from birth to puberty. At puberty, only 60,000 to 80,000 primary follicles are left in each ovary. The primary follicle gets surrounded by more layers of granulosa cells and become secondary follicle. Secondary follicle transforms into tertiary follicle. It has a fluid-filled cavity called antrum. That is, tertiary follicle has a fluid-filled cavity called antrum. The theca layer has two parts, the theca externa and theca interna. It is at this stage the primary oocyte within the tertiary follicle grows in size and become ready for meiotic division. Maturation phase. It is the third phase. During the phase of maturation, the diploid primary oocyte in the tertiary follicle undergoes first meiotic division to form two unequal haploid cells. So here the first meiotic division is unequal division. Two cells are formed, they are haploid, but division is unequal. One large cell and one small cell is formed. The larger cell is called the secondary oocyte and the smaller cell is called the first polar body. Now the tertiary follicle changes to Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle is the mature follicle. The secondary oocyte forms a new membrane called zona pellucida surrounding it. The secondary oocyte forms a new membrane called zona pellucida around it. The structure of ovary is given here. See the diagram. We can see primary follicles, secondary follicles, tertiary follicles and Graafian follicles in the diagram. Primary follicle with a single layer of granulose cells. It grows. Then here we can see the secondary follicle with more layers of cells. Then it develops a cavity, central cavity inside called the antrum and get transformed to tertiary follicle. Tertiary follicle changes to Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle is the mature follicle. It is within the tertiary follicle that the first meiotic division takes place and the secondary oocyte is formed. The secondary oocyte can be found in Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle is the mature follicle. Then the Graafian follicle ruptures, rupture means breaks, and the ovum is released from ovary. This process is called ovulation. After ovulation, the ruptured follicle transforms to a thick yellow-colored mass of tissue called corpus luteum. Here it is marked as corpus luteum. This is the newly formed corpus luteum. Then it further develops to a large one. This corpus luteum is mainly meant for the secretion of a female sex hormone called progesterone. So, this is the structure of ovary with different follicles: primary follicle, secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, Graafian follicle. Here ovulation can be seen. Then after ovulation, ruptured follicle transforms to corpus luteum. Corpus luteum secretes the hormone progesterone. Ovulation, the release of secondary oocyte or ovum from the ovary by the rupture of Graafian follicle is called ovulation. Next, corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is a thick mass of yellow-colored tissue formed from the ruptured Graafian follicle. It secretes a female sex hormone called progesterone. Next, we can have a comparison of spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Now, diagram A, spermatogenesis, and diagram B represents oogenesis. Here we can see spermatogonial cells, mitotic division, that is multiplication phase, then growth phase, maturation phase. All these phases are taking place after puberty. Puberty means attaining sexual maturity. So only after puberty, the formation of sperms or spermatogenesis take place. But in the case of oogenesis, it begins from fetal stage, that is before birth. The multiplication phase and growth phase is completed before birth. And the primary oocyte enters into prophase 1 of meiotic division. Then further division takes place after birth, that is after attaining sexual maturity or puberty. Then secondary oocyte is formed. That secondary oocyte transforms to ovum. Ovum is mostly released in the form of secondary oocyte. The second meiotic division completes only after fertilization. In the case of spermatogenesis, it starts from puberty, but oogenesis starts before the birth of a female baby. Multiplication phase and growth phase are completed, and the primary oocyte enter into prophase 1 of meiosis during the fetal stage. First meiotic division is completed after puberty and secondary oocyte is formed. Ovum is released in the form of secondary oocyte. In spermatogenesis, all these three phases are completed only after puberty. Now we can see certain questions and their answers here. What is oogenesis? Formation of mature female gamete, the ovum, is called oogenesis. Second, name the different phases in oogenesis: phase of multiplication, phase of growth, and phase of maturation. Name the site of oogenesis. Oogenesis takes place in ovary. Female germ cells that produce ovum are called dash oogonial cells. When does the oogenesis start? Oogenesis starts before birth of the baby. What is corpus luteum? Corpus luteum is a thick mass of yellow-colored tissue formed from the ruptured Graafian follicle. Corpus luteum secretes dash hormone, progesterone hormone. What are the three phases of oogenesis? Multiplication phase, growth phase, and maturation phase. What is zona pellucida? The membrane covering the secondary oocyte. What is the difference between primary oocyte and secondary oocyte? Primary oocyte is formed by mitosis, while secondary oocyte is formed by meiosis. Primary oocyte is diploid, secondary oocyte is haploid. Primary oocyte contains 46 chromosomes, secondary oocyte contains 23 chromosomes. Primary oocyte formed before birth, secondary oocyte formed after puberty. What is a primary oocyte? The oogonia divide by mitosis and enter into prophase 1 of meiosis. They are temporarily arrested in this stage and are called primary oocyte. What are primary, secondary, tertiary, and Graafian follicles? Primary oocyte surrounded by a layer of granulosa cells is called primary follicle. Primary follicle gets surrounded by more layers of granulosa cells is called secondary follicle. Secondary follicle develops a fluid-filled cavity called antrum and transforms into tertiary follicle. The primary oocyte completes its first meiotic division to form secondary oocyte at this stage. Mature follicle is called Graafian follicle. It contains the secondary oocyte. What is meant by ovulation? The process of release of ovum from the ovary by the rupture of Graafian follicle is called ovulation. What happens to the ruptured Graafian follicle after ovulation? After ovulation, the ruptured follicle transforms into corpus luteum, which secretes the female sex hormone called progesterone. So that is all about oogenesis. Thank you all for listening the topic. Thank you.